Hey guys, this is a Leupold Mark IV CQT. I mentioned this optic briefly in the video that I did about the Leupold LCO and D-EVO, but I managed to get my hands on one and I wanted to do a follow-up video more in-depth about this optic because it is a classic example of what happens when Leupold really pushes the boundaries of optics development. The Leupold Mark IV series was super hot in the early 2000s, particularly the LRT long-range tactical series. They also had the MRT mid-range tactical, which included a 1.5 to 5x LPVO, and then the CQT close quarters tactical, which is this. This is a 1 to 3x scope, and at the time that this came out, I believe it would have been one of, if not the first LPVOs to offer a true 1x on the low end. Almost all LPVOs available at the time, or even before that, would have been 1.1, 1.25, or 1.5x on the low end, whereas the CQT is actually a true 1x. The only other scope, I think, available at the time that did that would have been the Elcan Spectre DR1-4. As I've said before, the Elcan Spectre is basically two prism optics bolted to a Lazy Susan, whereas, despite what it looks like on the outside, the Mark IV CQT is a standard telescopic LPVO. You adjust from 1 to 3 by turning the zoom ring on the back just like any other scope. All the rest of this stuff is just the mount and the armor and some of the weird, quirky external features. First thing that jumps out at you when you look at the CQT is the Picatinny accessory rails. There's a 1913 rail section on the right side, nothing on the left, just smooth over there, and then there's sort of the illusion of a rail on the top. However, this is actually not really usable for anything, mostly because it's occluded by the turret cap on the top and the illumination dial on the back. There's also a pretty beefy integral mount system that includes the battery compartment. This is powered by a single AA that comes in a removable tube that sticks into the front right here. The mount itself is just two standard cross bolts and a clamp system, although the bottom of the main body of the mount is drilled for what looks like ACOG compatible mounting holes. I haven't tried using an ACOG mount on there, but I suspect it would be possible. All the other internals of this thing are pretty standard to a telescopic sight. It's a 1 to 3. You adjust the zoom with the zoom ring on the back. It actually turns the entire rear eyepiece. There is a diopter adjustment with a locking ring. It's not the more modern fast focus eyepiece. This is the classic locking style. There are elevation and windage turrets. They are capped. Nothing exciting there. And then there is an illumination dial. This thing looks pretty beefy, but the weight is actually just right around 20 ounces all in, including the mount and battery. So that's actually not all that bad considering a lightweight 1 to 4 LPVO and a lightweight mount weighs about 20 ounces. And because of all the extreme armoring done to this scope, it should be extremely durable, although perhaps not quite as durable as an ACOG, despite weighing a little bit more. This one, for example, had clearly been dropped really hard on the elevation turret cap, to the point where the cap was significantly out of round, would no longer thread on properly. I squeezed it back together again in my bench vise, and now it sort of works. The first peculiarity of this scope is that the objective lens diameter is 14 millimeter. It is a microscopic. 20 millimeter objective lens would be very small. 14 is ridiculous. Part of the reason that that's possible is because this only goes up to 3. So even at 3x, the exit pupil with a 14 millimeter objective is still usable. It's not great. The eye box becomes very tight and the scope is pretty dark at that point. However, again, for what this is intended to be used for, not really a problem. The 1x is not the flattest 1x that I've ever seen. Obviously, the Elcan Spectre is going to be a lot flatter. A lot of more modern LPVOs are also able to get a flatter image, but it is actually 1x, which at the time was a selling point. The last mechanical curiosity of the Mark IV CQT is the reticle. The original one had a massive circle dot reticle with amber illumination. That's what's in this example. There was later on a version that used a more standard BDC reticle, and I believe it was offered with red illumination as well. None of them were ever what you would call daylight bright, so that's not really an important consideration when choosing the reticle. The design of this reticle makes a lot more sense if you think about what this scope is really intended to do, and it helps to think of it as an analog to a modern red dot with magnifier combination. You really are only expected to take shots within the point-blank range of your zero. So for example, I would zero this center dot at 50/200. That zero will be consistent enough to make effective hits between 0 and probably 350 yards on the center dot. If you need to hold a little bit high, you can always do that as well. This is only 3x magnification, just to give you a little bit more ability to identify targets and a little bit more ability to take shots at targets that maybe are not presenting themselves fully out in the open. For example, somebody who's partially behind cover, partially poking out of a window, looking into a car, something like that. So I got this thing mounted up to a 14.5 pin and weld quad rail upper. This is a Mark III quad made by Focus Strip here on YouTube. Gives a little bit of that mid-2000s flavor. There's nothing mounted to the accessory rails of the scope because it's actually pretty difficult to mount anything up there. The rail pieces on the top are almost strictly ornamental because there's so much chance for occlusion from the illumination dial, from the front turret. It looks like you've got more Picatinny rail than you actually do. However, there are bevels as the rail sort of transitions from this 3-slot section into the illumination and the turret. And those bevels mean it's almost impossible to get anything on here that's farther forward or rearward than these 3 slots. And the front slot, why did they even put that there? I don't know. The ones on the side are actually usable. Probably this would be used for some kind of an illuminator, IR pointer, something like that. Maybe you could mount a red dot to the side, which would actually work reasonably well. However, if you're putting a redundant red dot on a close range 1x scope, you are really wasting your time. Okay, we are now at about 200. Let's see if our zero actually worked. If you look around on the internet, you can find some pictures of these being used by legit operators in the Middle Eastern theater in the mid-2000s. My favorite is a picture of a guy who's got a Mark IV CQT mounted to an M14 in a Sage EBR chassis. Kind of a fascinating conglomeration of choices that all came together to make that a reality. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed that look at this very interesting scope. This is one of those rare drunk Leupold designs that didn't really need a Mark II variation. They pretty much figured it all out right off the bat. Not that it was necessarily the best idea in the world, but I think they executed properly on it. If you were going to make one of these today, you would basically make an Elcan Spectre. I mean, the Elcan Spectre was a contemporary of this scope. It was much brighter, had a faster zoom, bigger, better objective lens, better illumination, better battery life. I mean, the Elcan Spectre would have been probably quite a lot nicer than this. However, the version of the Elcan Spectre that was available at the time was plagued with a whole bunch of small reliability issues. Not so for a simple, classic telescopic design in a rugged chassis made by Leupold. That's kind of not their MO. Thanks for watching, guys. If you'd like to support this channel and see really weird stuff like this flow through the pipeline, then you can check my Subscribe page out, link in the video description. Support me. I'll keep doing this. See you later.